we are necessarily and appropriately vulnerable to whatever degree. We need to have the confidence to be that guide, be that facilitator, be that leader, whichever other words we want to use, and to ride that out in a way that where we can't be relying on professional level capability, professional level experience, professional level perspective in all of our participants.
Welcome to Leading Notes, where I talk with musicians who are leading the revitalisation of social health in our communities. I'm your host, Melissa Forbes. Graham Sattler is an Australian musician whose career has taken him from the opera stage to the orchestra pit and the conductor's podium, ultimately to the heart of community music practice. He's worked as a trombonist and singer with the Australian Opera, as a conductor of orchestras and choirs across Australia and internationally, and spent over a decade as director of regional conservatoriums in New South Wales, leading music programs with aged, disability and at-risk youth communities. Graham holds a PhD in music education and a graduate certificate in the psychology of risk. And in 2019, he was awarded a Churchill Fellowship to investigate best practice community music leadership training programs across the US, Canada, Ireland, Scotland, England, Norway, Portugal, and Armenia. He's currently the CEO of the Christchurch Symphony Orchestra in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and is a member of the 2027 Global Arts MBA cohort at the Global Leaders Institute. Graham Sattler, welcome to Leading Notes.
Thank you, Melissa. It's a pleasure to be here.
Graham, you've described yourself as a musical inclusion advocate, and I love that term. So tell me what you mean by that, and how did you come about that term for yourself?
That's lovely that you love that term. That's great. And I'm not being facetious. I guess in trying to articulate the kind of my motivation, if you like, through and from which I do pretty well everything that I do, I settled on that term as being hopefully reasonably clear, in that I believe that music is a really powerful and available way to bring people together. That's a pretty kind of simplistic thing to say, I suppose, but I believe that that's the case. And in fact, in many ways, I believe it's the most accessible, it's the most accessible group activity, particularly group activity, that human beings can engage in. And that's something that I want to facilitate awareness of. So I'm very keen, and I'm always very, very, very keen to have any of these sort of notions or thoughts I believe that I have challenged. But I actually genuinely believe that music is the most accessible way. It's the activity that I think has the fewest impediments to participation, actually. And what I find is a constant, regardless of what I'm doing, who I'm speaking to, what the environment is, that I find myself either, at least, if not encouraging people into that understanding, certainly discussing it a lot. And as I say, even I'm always happy to have that challenge. But so that's kind of the centerpiece, I guess, of everything I do, is advocating for musical inclusion. Yeah. I think it's entirely safe. I think it's essentially only a positive thing. That's why.
Okay, really interestingly, I just had that notion challenged yesterday, that notion of accessibility, I guess.
Great.
And so what would you say to somebody who challenges that idea that this is the most accessible activity? What if someone said, oh, well, isn't sport more accessible, or, something else? Like, what would you say to that challenge?
Terrific. Well, I've thought a lot about this, and my experience of, which is largely only as an observer, of sport, for instance, seeing you mention that, is that physicality, dexterity, mobility, size, shape, stature, those things often play a significant part in sort of participation, access to participation in sports. And I am very confident that those things don't need to play a part in participating in musical activity. So again, that's a very, very kind of simplistic point, but it's one that I believe is the case, and I've not seen or experienced a challenge to.
The example that was given was this person was working for a government agency, and apparently every day before the doors opened, it was a public-facing agency, they were made to kind of do a team dance or something. And they felt that was, that they really didn't want to do that. And so I thought that was a really interesting example of somebody who felt like they'd kind of been coerced into, a participatory music kind of activity. Yeah, it was an interesting perspective.
If I can just comment on that one briefly.
Please.
You used the kind of magic alarm setting off word there, being made.
Yes, exactly.
And I think that part of the challenge that those of us who are fortunate enough to be designing, directing, facilitating, whatever it is, music activities, that part of our responsibility is to provide the activity in such a way that there's no making, that there's no forcing, that there are no kind of parameters that exclude. And not only that, but I think that is entirely possible to do. So there's a difference between specific activities, whether they are immediately obviously accessible. There's a difference between that and participation in music as very, very broadly accessible. So and those are not weasel words. That's precisely what I mean when I talk about music as being the least excluding and the most accessible participatory activity. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. And of course, as you know, in community music in particular, we have this kind of ethos of the invitation, and that comes from the work of Lee Higgins. And
Absolutely.
so it's always an invitation. People come on their own terms. They participate on their own terms. They're not made, in scare quotes, to do anything. And so educating people around the nature of community music and the invitational aspects, I think, is really important, because some people may feel that, if they're presented with a musical activity, that they have to participate in a certain way, there's that kind of sense of, not being able to come to it on their own terms, which is the absolute fundamental essence of community music,
It absolutely is. Yeah. It's the invitation. It's the offer.
That's
right.
It's
the kind of the impermeability, the impermeable, place or environment. And again, these are not weasel words at all, but the wonderful responsibility that those of us who are fortunate enough to be spending a lot of our thinking and our energies in this subject and on this subject, we have that responsibility to educate. And what a joy that is.
Graham, you've worked in some pretty high-powered musical contexts, I would say, in the past. And I'm just interested, did you always have this sense of inclusivity as part of your philosophy, or was there a particular experience that really crystallised the notion of inclusivity for you?
This is a great question, because actually there is, if not an exact moment, a very distilled period. So in terms of, crystallising, that's great, and really bringing it to the forefront and having me recognise it. I moved from, a major city, from at that point the most popular city in Australia, Sydney, to a small regional city, Orange, in New South Wales, 4 million, basically roughly 4 million to 40,000, and was responsible for designing programs that would engage, people in the community, engage with the institution, the conservatorium. What I discovered reasonably swiftly was that I was pretty well immediately answerable to anyone in the community not only answerable, but the feedback loop was very direct. And I was very conscious quite swiftly as I kind of embedded and circulated in that community and thought about what activities we could add to the program or whatever, how we would engage with people. I discovered what it was to be answerable to, responsible to, identifiable community. And that was when it kind of hit me. And it was that. So that was 2005 when that really crystallised. And that's when I thought, I want to investigate this thing, which I didn't know was called community music. I want to investigate this thing about non-professional participatory music and all of the non-musical benefits that are being reported to me on a pretty well daily basis and reported to me by the direct community and community members as if they were peripheral. But it was very clear to me, it hit me, quite strongly that these things weren't peripheral. These things were quality of life, sense of community, sense of value, being valued, sense of also valuing, all of those things that we often talk about and that became my PhD study. It was then, and it was because I could see, I could hear, and I was answerable, directly accountable to identifiable community.
Before we kind of delve into all of those amazing outcomes that you're describing, can you think of any times in your working life, say prior to moving to Orange, where you were in a situation that was not inclusive?
Yes. That's an easy one. I sure can. I mean, look, I grew up in very much in the sort of the classical Western European heritage music environment as a trombone player. Initially, an orchestral trombone player, and then I went into opera. I mean, my training and my sort of formative, which extended to mid-late 20s, whatever, musical training and enculturation in musical life. A lot of it was, and this is not a pejorative statement at all, but a lot of it was almost by nature exclusive. Yeah. So. Yes, and I can also remember, one particular experience, which is good because I hadn't thought about this, one particular experience where it was a choir that I was working with. That choir, there was a question over whether or not a non-hearing member of the community could join that choir. And that brought into sharp focus that very issue of what the rules are, what's acceptable, both ways, that is.
Interesting. I mean, if you're working in contexts that really value inclusion, accessibility, etc., the leaders need to have specific skills to make that all work, right? And your Churchill Fellowship was really, prompted by this gap in training that we have in terms of community music leaders. So why was that gap important, do you think? And why did you need to go about trying to fill it?
Terrific. I had seen and have seen a number of community music environments where, the first thing that sort of triggered these thoughts was a community music, a band, a choir, or whatever, doesn't matter, but a community music ensemble with great that operated with great enthusiasm, that was successful in inverted commas. Now, there's a dangerous word to use, but successful in that the members of the participants, the members of the group, talked about the activity as a positive and a satisfying one. That's it. So therefore, I would sort of call that successful. And the leadership changed, and I've seen this plenty of times, a number of times, several times in my years. The leadership changed, and the the enthusiasm, the reported enjoyment, the sense of self-esteem, the sense of community, the sense of cohesion just drained out of that ensemble. Now, the challenge there, of course, is it's not about blaming. I mean, it's definitely not about blaming. But that, in a sense, is a lost, in that sort of situation, is a lost opportunity. It's not just a lost opportunity, it's a sort of a crumbling community, if you like, because as we know, the community music ensemble or community music activity, varies between an enjoyable activity once a week for somebody to, something that is the mainstay of some people's sense of agency, viability, social cohesion, networking. So I have been struck a number of times by the impact of shifting leadership. And so that started me thinking very deeply about and observing what factors provided an environment where community music leadership, community music activity was and is underpinned not just competently but confidently in such a way that all of the aspects, all of the sort of the support, all of the aspects that participants, I don't want to say need, I think need. I'm trying to say something less, maybe less provocative, but all of those factors are sufficiently in a place to underpin the activity so that the benefits that people draw from community music activity are going to be reliably available. That's kind of it.
Yeah, right. So you went to, I think it was 8 countries on that fellowship trip. And I have spoken to you about this before, and you talk about confidence, this idea of confidence as being one of the big things that came out across all of those places that you went to. What do you mean when you say confidence? I mean, we know what it means in terms of the dictionary definition. What does that actually look like in practice?
Sure. So I guess there are a couple of aspects, but the thing that I am conscious of in terms of an element in leadership, which includes facilitation, all that stuff, but confidence to ride out the moments where maybe something doesn't go right in a performance or a rehearsal or a happening or whatever the experience is. Confidence to be able to deal calmly with an individual's challenge that they may have in a group or in a community. Confidence to guide progressively, to guide the community that a community music ensemble or group is. Every community ensemble group or group is a community in itself. So, and also the confidence as a leader, facilitator, conductor, whatever it is, however you are leading, confidence to plan around the dynamic in the group. Confidence to not come up with the perfect answer every time. Confidence to hand the leadership over as it kind of ebbs and flows from one, as arguably it should in a community music group. Confidence to assess whether the group could or should be doing a performance, in inverted commas, whatever that might be. Confidence to judge and assess what the community, regardless of their age, regardless of their health, psychological, physical, whatever, regardless of any of those factors, to be able to assess capability, assess program, even if we were to use the word curriculum in instances where it's relevant. That's what I mean. And as music leaders, as musicians, we are in many ways somewhere between profoundly and fairly vulnerable. I mean, given the training that most of us have had, frankly, which is largely about never being good enough, which is a whole other subject. But the thing is, we are necessarily and appropriately vulnerable to whatever degree. We need to have the confidence to be that guide, be that facilitator, be that leader, whichever other words we want to use, and to ride that out in a way that where we can't be relying on professional level capability, professional level experience, professional level perspective in all of our participants. That's a large chunk of it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I've just had the privilege of watching two amazing leaders in practice. One is Emma Dean, who I've interviewed for this podcast, and another is Dr. Jeanette Kennelly, who's a beautiful music therapist based in Brisbane. And what I was struck by was their confidence with uncertainty.
Yeah. That's a beautiful way of putting it.
And having this deep confidence that no matter what happens and what direction this goes in, we're all going to be okay, and it's going to be okay.
Yeah, that's it.
If only more of our leaders could be like that, right?
Totally, and it's an easy thing to say, as if confidence necessarily accrues or confidence necessarily occurs at an age or a stage or whatever. It's not the case. Plus, it's not reasonable to expect that. And going back to that other thing about, leadership in community music environments changing and it not being about blame, it's absolutely not reasonable to expect that level of confidence. And the thing is, what if our planning doesn't come to fruition? What if we don't get those 3 songs done ready for the concert next week? Yep. What if? And the bottom line, the baseline, I believe, has to be, I'll personalize it, right? But if I am kind, if I am intrinsically motivated to be contributing to this activity, if I feel joy from sharing a musical experience, if I have sufficient skills to do what I'm claiming I can do, then the worst thing that can happen, essentially, is that we are having a social time that is way more likely to be positive than anything else.
Yes.
And that's the confidence that I actually believe is essential.
Yeah, I love that. And also the confidence to improvise, and I don't necessarily mean only in the musical sense, but in the social sense, in whatever the group is kind of throwing up at you. So what I noticed with both Jeanette and Emma was that they embodied that kind of improv yes and ethos. So whatever came at them, I was like, okay, yeah. And what can we do with that? They weren't saying that, but I was noticing that in their responses, They never shut anything down,
Yeah, and something that I will always talk about if I'm asked, sometimes if I'm not, if I'm asked, is that whatever at the very first session, or if it is only one session, whatever it is that people bring into the room is enough.
Yeah,
it's always enough.
It's
always. Now, that might be pre-service or in-service generalist music teachers. That could be anyone. But the point is, there is I insist to myself that other than when they're walking into the room and they haven't yet seen me, I mustn't allow at any point for there to be a kind of a deficit to start with in that sense. Whatever they bring in is enough. Human beings are profoundly and intrinsically musical, right? And music is, similarly profoundly human. Whatever they bring in is enough. I've taken the responsibility to facilitate an activity where they're going to feel some sort of developments and enjoyment, and so the thing is, throughout a session, throughout a whatever it is, program, whatever, it's that thing that you just talked about. My version of it is that at every point, that kind of, zone of proximal development to, quote whatever, but that little leap, firstly, is completely supported by me and the group for any individual, and it's a small leap, but it's a leap. And so always being there at that, just there supporting. So there's always vulnerability. I'm getting out of bed in the morning, for heaven's sakes, but there's always, but we keep that keep that leap of vulnerability as kind of small as we can, and I need to have as much confidence again as possible that leap is going to be successful. Always be there with them, always be encouraging them to go to that next step, and being able to show them as swiftly as possible that leap was worth taking.
Yeah. So your work has kind of produced a model of leadership around pedagogy, entrepreneurship, artistic capability, communication and advocacy. I'm just wondering, over the last few years, have you noticed other things that you would add into that mix or take out?
That is fantastic. Sometimes the language I have to check myself on just to make sure. I mean, an interesting one is advocacy. Sometimes that is understood, not misunderstood, but sometimes that's understood on a sort of a political only level.
Yeah.
And so I need to always explain, or not always, but sometimes I need to explain that one. And that one, though, I have kept in because I think the advocacy piece there is advocating to the broader community, or maybe to a council, or maybe to a performance venue, or maybe whatever. And there's also the internal advocacy, which is, if not equally important, well, probably is equally important. So advocacy, not for why we should bother with music, but advocacy around reassurance and the benefit of valuing what we're doing. But and entrepreneurship is the other one that can sometimes be understood in various ways. But the thing that I mean by that, and I haven't come up for myself with a better term for it yet, is you're representing. You're likely to be, if you're the leader in community music, whatever the activity or environment is, you do need, I think, to be looking for places, opportunities to wave the banner, to actually promote the confidence that this group of folks deserves to have. And that's the kind of the entrepreneurship piece, if you like. And so I haven't really, at the kind of the level above that, I have thought a lot about, I think, as you're probably aware, my sense is that, effective leadership, community leadership, requires expertise in those things you've mentioned. And I do use the word expertise because I think it does.
Yeah.
But it requires expertise, again, confidence. I know it's boring, I keep using that word, and insight. But the other couple of things that I've thought of and that have come actually very helpful from external sources that have come up in some lectures or whatever as questions. But those two other things, not only the confidence piece, but courage. Courage, which is a great point.
That's great.
That came up actually actually two things came up in our master's lecture in Canada a couple of years ago. But courage. And another one that came up was a calling to be a community music leader. And I again, in terms of language and what the language means in different cultures, for me, and again, not a pejorative observation, but the word calling for me probably tilts a little unnecessarily into a kind of a religious or a religious kind of sense. Which is fine, but for me, I kind of tease that out to, I think I mentioned a moment ago, intrinsic motivation. So the need for the facilitator, the leader, to have something from within that could be called a calling. For me, I've sort of, as I say, broadened it to intrinsic motivation. But I was particularly thrilled when that and courage came up, because, of course, I hadn't teased courage out of confidence before, but they are quite different things. One can be confident, never arrogant. That's the other thing. Confidence and arrogance, two totally different things. Not just confident, but again, being courageous enough to particularly to not only to try, but sometimes the leadership in a group, any sort of community, might require a little more energy to kind of make the point or bring people along. But I have to admit, this model I've put a lot of thought in, and I actually test it pretty well constantly. And of course the artistic performance one, I think an ability and confidence in modelling as an essential human sort of pedagogy tool or technique. I believe that that's important. You don't have to be able to play every instrument in a group. You don't have to be able to, blah 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 blah. But you can demonstrate artistic proficiency and artistic understanding, and when it's energy, when it's emotion that is doing the communicating, that artistic capability really allows for that. Sometimes words are not the best way to communicate, as we know. So,
yeah, really wonderful model. Getting back to the idea of calling and your point around it having religious connotations, I take that point. To me, it probably hints more at the values that lie behind someone's motivation.
Perfect,
just wondering whether you think you see a set of common values among the people that you've worked with in leadership?
Yep. Yes, and I think generosity is a hugely important one. Self-deprecation, no. Sometimes there can be a bit of a Venn diagram there, which I would reject. I don't think, when I see self-deprecation being employed as a tool, I don't see that as being, we're all kind of in this together. I see that as being a sort of an erosion, if you like, of the confidence piece. But generosity, compassion, selflessness, again, that ain't self-deprecation. Selflessness in the lack of need to be personally benefiting from the interaction.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean not getting joy out of it. But that selflessness in that sense is a really key one. I think in terms of qualities, those are the three biggies.
Yeah.
There are all the skills on top of that, but in terms of the qualities and the values, I think that's it really.
Yeah.
And it may sound a little twee or cliched, but I kind of don't care, because I believe that's those things are key. And when those things aren't there, I think we notice it, and that's a different sort of vulnerability that comes into the relationship and the equation. People aren't stupid.
No, they can spot a phony, can't they?
They can. Yes, thank goodness. Yeah,
that's
thank goodness.
Right. Yeah. Graham, in your role at the moment with Christchurch Symphony Orchestra, I'm just keen to kind of dig into how you see professional music organisations like that. How do you think they're performing, for want of a better word, in terms of their community engagement and becoming more inclusive organisations? Because as we know, historically, they have not been very good at that. But there's been a massive push and a lot of great strides made to have orchestras and other professional music organisations be much more connected to community. So what's your kind of assessment of how that's going as someone who's in that space right now?
Right. So a couple of weeks ago I was in England, and I was in Scotland prior to that in England, and the reason I was there is because I'm a little obsessive about finding heritage performing arts organisations, in brackets largely orchestras, as they kind of feature quite largely in this whole subject. But finding those or identifying those in a way, it's a different sort of extension to the Churchill kind of journey in terms of training. But find the organisations, discuss as deeply as possible with the leaders of those organisations who appear to be motivated, and talking very, very, very much symphony orchestras, like heritage performing, professional, large and smaller. And in all honesty, and I'm quite obsessive about this, so in all honesty, there were a few that I hadn't as yet. So this was the case most recently, not anything. Sometimes I'm really encouraged, and often I'm not. And it is not for me to judge at all. I find myself all too frequently saying, particularly when I'm challenging the notion, but publicly saying that this orchestra, this organisation, is unusual in the amount of community engagement and therefore community music work that is part of our business model. Just is like it's a big chunk. It's 60% of our organisational output. Wow. 60%, and I'm often talking about that, and then I'm being asked questions from sort of colleagues in different parts of the world, things that include how do you make the players do it? And when there's that M word again, and I kind of don't even want to answer when I've heard that word, but I do. But anyway, this seems tangential, but it's not. What I'm trying to say is part of, I will say the problem is that, of course, these organisations are made up of people who passionately have pursued a goal, frequently since they were 4, and they have been schooled in this trajectory. That's the players, thank goodness. Wonderful players. We have wonderful players, thank goodness, right? And that's the case all over the world. So, the artistic and then therefore the business model has been about, Rack 2 and Haydn, Stravinsky, whatever, live on stage, on the altar, with people kept at whatever distance. Now, that sounds like I'm being facetious just because I'm making myself laugh on the inside. But a lot of the motivation for non-main stage, if I can put it so crudely, stuff. A lot of the motivation has been around funding and has been around increasing audiences through, the old-fashioned sort of, BBC and ABC and sort of 1960s models of education concerts and stuff, which are great, by the way. But I don't know that what I've arrived at most recently, and what I kind of grill people on, is their motivation for their business model, whatever it is, and their motivation for the non-main stage stuff from the community connection stuff. It's hard to teach old whatevers, new whatevers, and you can't expect it. But I do think that as an industry, we're nowhere near it. That's actually really what I think. And that's not a pejorative statement, but it's an honest answer to your question. There are a few. I met a couple of great people recently. For instance, I met the CEO of the Manchester Camerata, Bob O'Reilly, in Manchester, and I actually had to say to him, Bob, this is about the first time I've heard someone speak, and maybe there are millions more I haven't met, but the first time I've met someone speak in the same sort of terms, motivation-wise, about so it takes determination, and it takes care, and it also, I know you haven't asked me what it takes, but it also takes and this is the advocacy, internal advocacy coming up again. We have to remind our highly skilled orchestral players that when they are working with prisoners in a transition program, when they are working with whoever it is, I don't need to run through all the sorts of cohorts, that interaction is as valued as the Borodin or the Rachmaninoff, all this, whatever it is, it is as valued. And the fact that they are highly skilled, highly experienced, that they have such insight, they have such capability, they are so connected to musicking, that means that interaction with whoever the participant is the most effective it can be, because of those skills and that ability and that experience that they have. And it's essential that we're expressing that continuously, A, because it's true, and B and C and D because it's true, but also culturally it's a bit of a variation from, the kind of the historical norm. So, sorry, lengthy and slightly wobbly answer, but I'm passionate about it.
Great answer, and one that I think could be the subject of an entire episode, actually, in and of itself.
Could be.
Because it's really kind of trying to move a behemoth in a in a very different direction.
It is.
And I think, what you were hinting at there in terms of motivation, perhaps, is that some are motivated by funding, and they may have some KPIs where they have to meet.
Of course.
And that's, of course, that's a reality.
Yep.
But in terms of then the efficacy of that, if it's not really motivated from the place that you're talking about, is it really going to achieve the aim? Don't know.
May well ask.
But I think that we could definitely have a whole conversation on that. It's really fascinating. Look, Graham, this time has gone really quickly, and we've come to almost to the end of our interview together. But I ask the same 3 questions of everybody on the show in season 2. And so the first one that I'd love to ask you is, what's the most important lesson about human connection that music has taught you?
Fantastic. That is fantastic. I'd say what it's taught me is how comparatively ineffective words can be compared to making music together. And making might be largely listening and participating to a degree.
Yeah.
But how it's interesting to hear me say that, and I agree. Yes, Graham, I think I do definitely how comparatively ineffective language is.
Yeah, that's a fascinating answer.
That's good.
If you had to choose one song to bring a group of random people together, what would it be and why?
Okay, that's fantastic. So the immediate thought I have is, because I think a lot about language, and I think a lot about the notion that music is an international language, and the fact that I don't really agree with that. I think it's better than language, which brings me to, I would say, something like the humming chorus from Madame Butterfly, because it's a great tune and it has no words.
Yeah.
And how could you not hum along?
Beautiful, beautiful. Love it. Okay, Graham, I'm going to give you a magic wand. And you get one wave only. What are you going to achieve with your one wave?
Confidence in humanity.
Confidence in humanity. Graham Sattler, thank you for making music that matters and for being my guest today on Leading Notes.
An utter pleasure, Melissa. Thank you.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and make sure to leave a review. I acknowledge that this podcast is produced on the lands of the Gayabal and Jarowair peoples of the Toowoomba region, and I pay my respect to all elders. Mark Schultes produced the original music for this podcast. Thanks for listening. Now go make music that matters.